Welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversations, your channel for psychospiritual reflections and experiences. And now, to introduce you to our topic for today, here is your host, Kenneth Sorensen.
Today's guest is Jan Koniholm, with whom I have the pleasure of working on translating Assagioli's Italian articles for my website. Jan Koniholm first encountered psychosynthesis in 2002 when he was still employed as a professional land surveyor and engineer. He had studied philosophy in college and attended divinity school, but left without getting a degree when the needs of marriage and a new family took precedence over graduate school. So he entered the workforce and eventually attained professional status as a surveyor. But philosophy, psychology, and spirituality always remained very important for him, and when he discovered psychosynthesis, he knew he had found the right groove. He trained for 3 years and has mostly used it in personal life rather than professionally. He was co-chair of the Association for the Advancement of Psychosynthesis and served the AAP in many capacities for about 15 years, including being the founding editor of Psychosynthesis Quarterly. Most recently, he has been translating many unknown Italian language essays written by Roberto Assagioli into English. He retired from his engineering and surveying work in 2015 after organizing the International AAP Psychosynthesis Conference in Montreal that year. I hope you will enjoy this conversation where we reflect on Jan's out-of-body experience, his encounter with his higher self, his work with the psychosynthesis of the couple, and his understanding of why there is a reluctance to pursue the higher reaches of human nature actively within the psychosynthesis community in US. Please help us spread the word about psychosynthesis by liking and subscribing to this channel, and please comment if you have feedback. Now, without further ado, Jan Koniholm. Hi, Jan, and welcome to Psychosynthesis Conversation.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm so happy to have you on board. And we have actually, I know you for some time now, first as the editor of the AAP journal, the Association for the Advancement of Psychosynthesis, where you were the founding editor. And then lately we have had some kind of deep work together, translation of many of Assagioli's Italian articles, and we will hear a bit about what you learned through all these translations. However, before we go into to all that, I would like to hear about your journey into psychosynthesis and what still drives your enthusiasm for that particular vision.
I first discovered psychosynthesis maybe 21 years ago by accident. I went to kind of a whole health expo and somebody was giving a talk. And I thought, well, let's just go find out what it is. And it was someone from the Berkshire Psychosynthesis Center giving a talk on psychosynthesis. And I went, wow, this is what I've been waiting for. Because I was living in a kind of a dead-end professional life at the time, and my personal and spiritual and psychological needs were just going nowhere. So I climbed on board, started the training, started reading, started working with people. Did the training at the Synthesis Center in Amherst, Massachusetts for 3 years.
That's the Didi Furman's place?
Yes, Didi Furman was my primary trainer. I thought, the training was for professional purposes for becoming a counselor, and it was focused in that direction. And when I was finishing up on my internship the last year, I had a couple of clients I was working with, and I found this didn't work for me very well. I had people who didn't want to do the work, who wanted to come in and spin their wheels. And I went, I'm not sure if this is for me. So my main profession at the time was being a land surveyor and engineer. My interest had always been in psychology and philosophy. I studied philosophy in college, and I went to divinity school with the idea of some spiritual life. But psychology has always been right there, a strong interest in my reading. But I backed away from becoming a professional counselor. Being in middle age, late middle age, it was difficult to start over again as a career. But within 3 years of my training being completed, I sort of was thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool. If you were the shock treatment of learning how.
Yes.
Because my wife had what Roberto called an eruption of forces from the unconscious. 3 years after my training finished, it was devastating, life-threatening, completely wrecked our lives. And I scrambled to find what was going on because we didn't know. We went to every kind of therapist known, psychosynthesis, you name it. We tried everything. She ended up in a hospital. But the hospital made things much worse. But we had no idea what to do. So it's a long journey that actually lasted off and on for 12 years, in which psychosynthesis ended up playing a very important role. It couldn't be used at first. As Roberto says, you really don't usually use psychosynthesis on people who are psychotic or really the deep, 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 horrible issues. But nothing else worked either. And we discovered by means of one of those wonderful synchronicities, a person who had been a trauma therapist, who I had invited to the 2008 Psychosynthesis AAP conference in Vermont, who came and worked with my wife and with me and taught us about emotional freedom techniques, meridian tapping. And I soon discovered this was entirely compatible with psychosynthesis. In fact, it is a psychosynthetic technique because it is a form of mind-body disidentification.
Yes.
And that was the beginning of my wife's healing. From then on, we could begin to use real psychosynthesis along with many other techniques. So meanwhile, I was spending whatever time I wasn't being both a psychologist, a therapist, a physical therapist, a caretaker. I joined the steering committee of AAP, became the editor of the AAP News, the newsletter, which later I transformed into the Psychosynthesis Quarterly. Organized a couple of conferences, became involved with people worldwide, which was wonderful, and learned a little bit as I went along. But my main psychosynthesis activity was going from deep, deep, deep into the lowest portions of the unconscious, trying to make it to ground zero. And then eventually, years and years later, beginning to work up into the higher unconscious, both me and my wife together, and learning by doing about what is the psychosynthesis of the couple, which it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey and horrible at the same time. But it's the horribleness is kind of past us now. We're going into the wonderful part.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Was there anything in psychosynthesis in particular that, it's a map of the human psyche? Is there anything in particular in the way psychosynthesis describe the human condition and constitution and development that were particularly relevant for you and aligned with how you experience life? Because psychosynthesis is pretty much based on psychological experiences and spiritual experience. It's an experiential approach as well as a psycho-spiritual practice. So was there anything, you just said, this is what I need. There was an instant recognition, but you must have been awakening or been aware of an ability to recognize the theory in within yourself?
When I first discovered it, I think I'd been sort of casting about. I had read psychology and philosophy ever since I was a kid.
Mm.
I had read everything from Carl Rogers to Wilhelm Reich to you name it. I'd read all kinds of stuff. And I'd worked in philosophy. I'd worked in spirituality and religion, and nothing seemed to pull together for me. It was here, there. And when I began to get into psychosynthesis, for the first part is that it was experiential. It was like, no, this isn't just a bunch of ideas.
Exactly.
This is something you do. And you do with your mind, with your body, with your emotions, with all of yourself.
Mm.
And of course, that's taken years to actually make that happen. My training was experiential, but it took a lot more experience to make it really sink down to become just part of who I am now.
Mm.
But the part that was attractive, I think, was the bringing together of the disparate elements of the personality, which is subpersonality theory, I suppose you could say, was the thing that draws a lot of people first, because we realize that, oh, it's not just me. There's this part and that part, this part and that part, and they're rowing 5 or 6 different boats in different directions too.
Yes,
And sometimes
indeed.
throwing things at each other. So that's kind of what drew me to begin with. Once I was in the deep end, I looked for how psychosynthesis can be an instrument of healing. It was only years later that I discovered that Roberto Assagioli's first public announcement of psychosynthesis was called a new method of healing. And healing is what I used it for, both healing for myself and for my wife. And it's been wonderful. But it's work. It's daily work. But the work begins off, if you're in deep doo-doo, as being very, very hard.
Exactly.
Excruciatingly painful, difficult work. When I first trained in psychosynthesis and I read Roberto saying psychosynthesis presupposes psychoanalysis, I thought he meant Freud. And then it took some years later to realize, no, what he meant is that the analysis part was the digging down into the basement to get your stuff cleared around and healed up, and making it to the ground floor.
Exactly.
You've got to do that work first.
Yeah.
And then the real synthesis part begins then. But if you haven't done that basic basement work, your foundation isn't good.
No.
And so it creeps up. So I think the healing part became extremely important. And I've always lived with a fairly strong spiritual orientation, even though it's been non-religious or non-conventional. And psychosynthesis coordinated my psyche, my mind, my ordinary personality with spirituality in a practical way. Gave me a direction to what to go for.
Yeah, and as far as I recall, I recall reading an article where you were mentioning some kind of out-of-body experience that suits very well into how Assagioli speaks about that type of experiences. Could you tell us about under what circumstances did you experience this?
That happened 25 years before I discovered psychosynthesis. I was in a hospital with cancer, facing death. I was very frightened. And I didn't let myself know that I was frightened. I was so scared, there were 2 experiences that were within a few months of each other. The first was an interior visionary experience, which only years later, after psychosynthesis came in my life, I could look back and say, oh, I had a direct encounter with higher self, initiated by higher self. But I was floundering and going, help, inwardly. just outwardly, I was numb and I was being bombarded with chemotherapy. The worst physical experience of my life. It was brutal. But I went into a spiritual experience and encountered that ineffable, indescribable being in which I felt completely loved and accepted and known enough so that I was shown almost like a near-death experience, a panorama of many years of my life condensed into a few seconds, in which I knew how I had done and basically caused my cancer. And I was given basically a choice to use an active will to choose healing, which I did. A few months later, because I didn't get any indication to stop my chemotherapy or my treatment, so I kept on going, and it was more and more brutal, finally ending in a major surgery looking for whatever was left of the cancer after this brutal chemotherapy. And I was in the intensive care unit, and my body was screaming bloody murder because I had been sliced right up and down the middle, like a 12 or 15-inch incision. I was cut wide open and then sewed back together again. And I literally just popped out, I guess, because I was over somewhere in the room listening and looking at my body screaming bloody murder and saying, oh, you never did that before. And looking at my friends who were at the door, who weren't allowed in, and saying, I wish I could tell them that I'm really okay. Yes, my body is screaming, but I think I'll amuse myself for a while. And I sort of called up an image of a marching band at a football game playing Bach in the middle of a football game. And realized that I was okay.
Yeah.
And then at some point I popped back into my body and, oh, the pain came back. But apparently I was able to handle the pain at that point. So I popped back in. This was not something that was done willingly. It had been done. Oh, it happened. It happened. I happened. I was out. It happened. I was back in. But I was quite clearly, had a very clear consciousness that I'm over here and my body's over there.
Yeah.
And I felt rather like a parent saying, I wish I could help you, and I will. When I get back in, I'll help you in whatever way I can. But it was mostly the realization that I'm okay and I will be okay.
When you were out of the body, were there any kind of, some people who have these types of out-of-body experience have some kind of recollection or some kind of higher spiritual experience where they see the purpose of life, or they have to take a new direction in life, or some kind of a guidance. Were there any type of these experience involved in this?
Not in the OOB in the hospital, in the ICU. That happened in the previous one that I mentioned. I was basically, you could say I was out of body. I was out of time and space.
Yes.
And the visionary experience in my hospital bed with the higher self. And that completely turned my life around.
Okay.
That was a complete 180-degree reversal. I came in there being an arrogant fool, a materialist, an atheist, a jerk. And in the space of, I have no idea how much time it took, whether it was 15 seconds or it could have been hours. Have no idea.
No.
But when it came out, I was loved by the universe. I felt safe. I felt loved. I knew I didn't have to think about whether I believed in God or a higher power. It was there.
Yeah.
And so that is what shifted things around for me. By the time I had the OOB in the ICU 3 or 4 months later, this was already established because I had no more fear of dying. The visionary experience, basically, I hadn't explored life or death, but I was assured, you made the choice. The power comes from here, this other source.
Yeah.
This power will assure if you choose life, you'll live. Period. Done. No problem. You're done. So go ahead now. So in the hospital ICU, when I was my body was screaming. I had no fear. I just hurt unbearably.
Yeah.
So popping out of the body and looking and being basically sympathetic toward what the suffering, at the time I didn't say that I put you through, but the suffering that we, the collective myself, was undergoing. It was a sympathetic moment. And then when I went back in, it was like, okay, now we've got to finish the journey, which is going to be through physical pain.
Yeah.
But the switch around, the revelation had already happened.
Yeah. So you can say that one of the central affirmations of Assagioli in his disidentification exercise is that I have a body, but I'm not my body. And you have that direct experience that you, consciousness itself, can exist outside your body, and also outside time and space, or outside time at least, because you say it could happen 15 seconds or perhaps hours. You were not aware, so you were in another dimension, so to speak.
Yes, in the visionary experience, it was not in any kind of known spatial temporal dimension. It was completely elsewhere or nowhere, in no time, no space.
Yeah.
I had some images that I called up that were very evocative, but I knew that those were things that I was using. I even knew at the time that I was using this to symbolize what was happening. I symbolized getting into it, since I had visualized, and not deliberately, but I got the vision of walking down a long series of steps, down a deep spiral staircase, until I came to the lowest foundational place, which was nowhere. And what I experienced was an inner voice, which wasn't even a voice. It was direct communication. Just the knowing that was, I guess, translated into language I could understand. But yeah, and in the ICU, I certainly had the experience of being in a place consciously across the room, and my body was over there.
Yes.
And my friends were over there.
Yeah.
And so I could feel a very distinct sense of, here am I, and there is my body. So it was experiencing a disidentified state. And yet I was feeling very, very at peace, very okay, and very sympathetic and strong.
So you can say you were not from one point of view, you can say you were separate from your conscience, from your body, but actually you still were linked to the body, because you could enter the body again. So we say that, sometimes we say that I have a body, but I'm not my body, and we mean that we the identity, consciousness itself, is distinct from the body, but not totally separated from the body, because then we would be dead.
Yes, that was the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Long before I had any of this language to describe it.
Yes, exactly. And that's my basic point here, is that in some way you had psychosynthesis training, through life before you enter the more formal training, because these types of experience that you are pointing to is impossible to transmit through a training. You have to have them yourself. It's an inner experience, and if you don't have that kind of experience, it is only belief. A lot of the theories in psychosynthesis about a superconscious, about a higher self, it remains within the region of faith rather than experience. But you, in some way, were giving some kind of a foundation for psychosynthesis before even starting at it at a more formal level.
Yes, for sure. There was an experiential base that I could eventually, once I had the language for it, I could say, oh, that's what happened to me. Yep.
Yeah.
That's it. And like you say, by the time I put that together, I could realize, oh, this isn't just theory for me. This is something, actually the deepest part of psychosynthesis, which is to me the higher self, the teaching of the higher self and how it connects, I'd already had. So I'm kind of putting together the nuts and bolts after that.
Exactly.
To build up the structure, but the foundation, the bottom and the top were already there for me.
And it must have been quite an intense and radical transformation. You were a materialist before this experience, and then your consciousness is open to a totally new dimension, and then a new Jan Kuniholm opens up.
Yes. I'd been scornful of any kind of religion and spirituality for many years before I got in the hospital. In fact, I sort of, well, I don't have to go into it. I was just nasty. I was nasty about it. I had no use for it whatsoever.
No.
But I had become exposed because I was quite a rationalist. I fancied myself quite a rationalist. And I had just, without coincidence, it turned out the same month that actually my cancer started, I ran across the condensed book version of Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And I thought that began my process because Raymond Moody was a philosopher as well as a doctor. And he didn't offer faith. He said, this is just what I've seen. This is the phenomena. This is what I've observed over and over and over and over again. And this is what I theorize. And so I went, oh, finally somebody who wasn't just preaching at me and saying, take it on faith. He said, this is the phenomena. This is real. It's occurred. Give it a shot. So I had that in my mind already before I went into the hospital.
And what is it out of body experiences he's investigating or past life recollections?
Near-death experiences.
Near-death, yes, okay.
Near-death experiences. As a doctor, he had people who had technically died and then came back and said, oh, this is what happened while the flat line of the computer said I was dead. And yet I was up there and floating around in space watching you, or I had the bright light and so he assembled the phenomena people reported. And in some cases verified that they reported things that were happening outside of their body while they were dead, that theoretically they couldn't have known. And he says, I'm not telling you what it is or what it isn't. I'm just saying, here it is. Here's the phenomenon of this as reported and as observed. And that began to open me up. That was like the crack in the eggshell that lets the light in, It's like, oh, okay, it's not closed off completely anymore. There's a little bit of light coming in that I could think, oh, well, geez, this guy is, he's offering something to think about. So I thought about it.
And I think what Assagioli called this is that it's some kind of a removal of the illusion of materialism. So many people has this fear of dying, fear of death, and of course many of us, even though we believe in an afterlife, we will have fear when we enter, the transition. But if we have had already the experiences or scientific evidence of some kind that there is an afterlife, then the illusion of, this black hole that everything is we are just done when we die will be dismissed or perhaps removed entirely, because the light of the other world will enter, and we have this link of faith or conviction that there is another life after the physical life. And I think that's a tremendous, important, insight that people need, because we do so many things in life to postpone the time where we have to die, because we have this big fear of it.
Yeah. I think in my case, I was physically afraid of dying, not wanting to. And I think after all these years, I look back and I put it together and say, like many people, I thought that it was an either or thing, life or death. And certainly the body has its own integrity and likes to keep it. But the larger consciousness, I've come to realize that what this has shown me is that there are two dimensions of being. From a conventional standpoint, we call those two dimensions living or dying. And we occupy most of our time and space, our conscious awareness, in that waking, living space. But many of us realize that when you're asleep, you're experiencing a whole lot of things that are very much like what everybody describes as what happens after you die. And some of us are aware of it. And that's telling me the dimension's always been there.
Exactly.
It's not something that happens when you, quote, physically die. It's just that you go more completely in that dimension. Instead of one foot in each world, you move on to that next, for the next stage.
Yeah.
So, but that really took away the fear from me completely. First, it took away the fear that I would die at that time.
Yeah.
And then eventually it took away the fear of dying altogether.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's not there's a comedian who said, I'm not afraid of dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens.
Exactly.
And for some people, that happens in rather painfully for either a long term or a short term. But it's a dimension of being. In most transitions, they could be painful, they could be shocking, they could be one way. The transitions, they take you out of your comfort zone. So I'm assuming that dying might be moving out of my comfort zone unless you're fully prepared for it. As the reports indicate that Roberto Assagioli himself was quite prepared for it and saying, let's go, I can't wait, come on, bring it on. Enough of this.
No, I actually think, as far as I recall, that he would like to have a little more time to finish his last book. But he was not, the book he worked on just prior his death, High Psychology and the Self. But he got the flu, as far as I know, and then he just went away. But he was fully prepared, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
And then when you, now years after your training and you have these experiences, when you look back on your life and look at what psychosynthesis have given you, what will you say is the most important things for you? What has been of the most practical value in order to, giving you tools to live a good life?
Well, the tools, I think psychosynthesis is both an orientation and a toolbox.
Exactly.
But as Roberto said, it's the orientation and we'll use whatever tools work.
Yes.
But there are some that are more favored and more particular to psychosynthesis, subpersonality theory and practice. That's been a big deal, and I'm aware of this and I use it. Although many of my subs are becoming integrated, so it's something that I don't spend as much time with. But when they, there's a few that pop up and go, oh, here I am. You haven't worked with me yet. So that still happens. In the last couple of years, my focus and my most useful portion of using psychosynthesis has been using ideal models with affirmations. I'm finding that my subconscious or unconscious or other parts of me are more responsive now to my will. And I can call up an ideal model and accept it and saying, this is who I am. And my inner parts say, oh, okay, let's do that. We'll be that. And I begin to shift very quickly.
Okay.
Sometimes the shift takes time, of course. In this earthly existence, everything takes time. But portions of me are much more responsive than when I was younger, when things took years and years to get anywhere at all. And it was always 3 steps forward and 2.5 steps back. Now I feel that these techniques in particular, I use disidentification of a sort, almost unconsciously. I do it. It's plugged in as part of my automatic process. I do it when I exercise every day,
Mm,
morning and night. I do physical exercises, but they're also emotional and mental. And disidentification is just part of it.
mm,
Um, what Roberto called my psychological hygiene, you know, like
exactly.
taking a spiritual shower every day. Um, so I think those are the things that for me have been most important practically. Um, but having that sense of things are connected. I think when I started, things were not connected in my life. There was this,
Mm,
there was that. Um, Even things that were going well, weren't always connected. And so I'm living a more unified life,
mm,
a synthetic life, and it feels good. I'm just getting happier. Um, I like getting older in this respect,
mm,
physically getting older. I'm 75 and I can feel it. The body is not doing what it did 20 years ago when I first started my training. Um, but it's not as bad as what some people might expect. In fact, I'm
mm,
finding some regeneration in a sense is quite possible.
mm,
So I guess I'm able to use it to help people almost unbeknownst to them. Um, it's something that when I'm aware of something, I just drop a hint here and there and see if somebody will pick something up if they need something.
mm,
I actually ended up working as a counselor, not professionally, but somebody needed some help and knew that I was trained in this stuff. And I used it for 8 weeks with somebody, which is the only time I've actually worked directly with somebody in a counseling capacity
mm.
since I left off my training almost 20 years ago. And it was highly effective, highly satisfying. Um, it was good.
Mm.
So, um, but it's also given me a place to put my energies. I've retired from my survey engineering job 8 years ago. So I focused after that on my um, work. I organized an international psychosynthesis conference in 2015. I kept on working on the quarterly till I stepped away from that. And then I began to work with books and translations.
Mm.
So I like having something to do that's meaningful. And so
Yeah.
that has been a part for me. It's like, oh, here's something I can do that I can put out in the world that gets out there. And you're, of course, part of that.
Definitely. And it's no secret that you have been very busy the last couple of months or perhaps a year with translating a lot of articles. I guess perhaps around 100. Have you counted them?
No, I haven't counted them, but actually it's going on 2 years since I first started.
Ah, yes.
Um, I'd kind of gotten into this almost by accident because I wanted to write a book on the psychosynthesis of the couple.
Yes.
And so I started digging up what Roberto Assagioli had to say about it
Mm,
and found that some of the most important stuff was still in French or Italian. So at first I looked around for someone to do the translations. And I found one person that could do some of it, but she was too busy to do all of it. And then I
mm,
started looking, oh, there's a translator program on the computer. So I've been a writer all my life. So I thought, well, I could probably supply the English part and let's see what I can do with this. And so I translated several of the pieces I needed for um, what eventually became an assemblage of a synthetic essay of Roberto's writings on the psychosynthesis of the couple.
mm,
A lot of that I translated for that. And that's it. Oh, this is working.
mm.
Let's keep going. Let's see what else is there. And of course, you were on board with that, saying this is dovetailed with what you want to do. So
Yeah,
it took off.
and I really appreciated the book about the couple. I think you brought a lot of new insight into the whole understanding of what's going on when you have a committed couple, the psychosynthesis of the couple. Could you share a little bit about what are the most essential points that Assagioli brings forward when he speaks about the psychosynthesis of the couple?
Oh my goodness. Ah, I didn't prepare my thoughts on this. There's so much.
No, yeah.
It's a small book, but it's packed.
But what
Um,
I recall from reading it is that, that the idea that the couple becomes a new entity,
yes.
that one and one become three in some way, that you merge on many levels: physical, emotional, mental, intuitive, and the connection can be stronger on the material one and looser in the intuitive one. But this whole understanding that each person is a multidimensional being, consisting of many levels that are trying to merge and functioning as a whole. I think that was really a revolutionary understanding for my sake.
Yes, that actually the idea originally came from Hermann Kaiserling, whom Assagioli quoted thousands of times. He was a very important thinker and writer in Assagioli's life, but he came up with the idea of the couple, the energy of the couple being like an ellipsis with two focuses, two foci. And Assagioli said, that's it for sure. You have a single entity. Ideally, now people who just get together, that doesn't happen necessarily. That's only the result of a long process of synthesis.
Yeah.
Truly synthesis. Some people live together their whole lives in parallel. The synthesis never happens. But for those who do make this move, where you have the unity and diversity together, they are two and they are one. And
yes,
being one doesn't take away from their being the two.
No.
And it transcends logic. So yeah, that perhaps is the most amazing idea. I discovered only as I'm working with more work that he said, no, this entity idea, it occurs at every level of being. A human being actually is an entity. It's a collective entity.
Yeah.
I'm a collective entity. There's 5 billion bacteria inside of me that are not human.
Yeah.
And there's other things that are here that I'm a collective entity. And then when two people come together, that is a collective entity. And the interesting thing was that he said that a couple is probably the most difficult synthesis there is. It's more difficult than a group or a collective, an organization, a larger group, a nation. It's the hardest to work with because it has the potential for the greatest depth and intimacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You uncover everything. If you really become a couple, you go into all the areas.
Yeah.
But the thing that also he pointed out is that the couple perhaps provides the greatest opportunity for personal development of any human endeavor, because the opportunities are there. And sometimes we don't feel like there are opportunities. There are challenges. The difficulties we encounter are, in fact, he said, he quoted someone saying that life progresses and develops as a series of meeting crises. And the couple offers great opportunity for that all the time.
I would say that, it's very rare that if we really love another person, then we are able to transcend or transform parts of us that we were not able to do on our own, because it takes that extra love for the other. Because if we don't transform, we hurt the other, and we don't want to hurt the other. And I could say the same with a child. As a parent, if you really love the child, you do so many things that you actually don't like to do on some level, but you do it out of love and of course also out of duty. So this self-sacrificial element, where we have to go beyond our egotistic impulses and what I just like and feel to do right now, we have to relinquish these impulses, or sometimes just let them wait, in order to, build a relationship or build a family. So I really agree that a committed relationship and a family life is the biggest opportunity for personal and spiritual development.
The interesting thing that he showed is that compromise between people is actually, it's good, but if you stop there, you'll end up being dissatisfied. He showed compromise is really the first step toward synthesis.
Yes.
And it's the synthesis that people, a lot of times, a lot of folks don't want to do that level of work.
No.
It's hard. It's hard to getting to the place where, no, this is not giving up what I want. It's not a sacrifice in the long run. It is what I truly want. It is what's good for us, for the whole.
Yeah.
And then for what is good for you and me is what's good for us. So he showed that in a variety of different ways, and discussed, I think, some of the dynamics of how it happens. I thought that perhaps there were things that could be added, so I'm harboring the thought of continuing on with another book, to kind of follow up on what Roberto had said and what we put together in the psychosynthesis of the couple. My tongue still sometimes stumbles over the word psychosynthesis, but there's more to go.
Yeah. So you have now made a deep dive into all these new Italian articles coming out of Vittorio Vigliente's website, and ultimately from the Assagioli archive in Florence. There is an online library or archive everyone can visit. So what was there anything new for you? Is there anything, English speaking people have never, encountered these papers before? So from your perspective, was there a lot of new stuff, new surprises of how Assagioli envisioned psychosynthesis and his thoughts about self and personality and stuff like that?
I think I discover something new with every piece that I work on. It's amazing. I mean, all we had for years was the psychosynthesis collection of basic writings and the active will, and a few other pieces that we've discovered later that were published in English by the Psychosynthesis Research Foundation.
Transpersonal development. The third book,
Transpersonal development was brought out later, but that's been available also. But my gosh, there's so much stuff. And the emphases that I think I was surprised to find that Roberto Assagioli, his interests were almost unlimited. He went here, there, he did social, he did parapsychology, he did spirituality. He was interested in just about everything. And he actually ended up talking and writing about so many things, and all from a synthetic point of view. And he began writing very early, when he was still basically just barely a teenager. One of the pieces I'm working on recently, he wrote when he was 21. And the ideas in it, he was a little cocky at that age, as he later went back and, well, that was kind of immature. But the ideas were solid. There were things that he used right on. But his emphasis on spirituality, I think, is what surprised me. A lot of English-speaking people who've learned psychosynthesis think of it as purely just psychology. And there was a great deal of effort to make sure that it stayed just psychology. People shied away from any kind of spirituality, any kind. Even though he said it's like psychosynthesis brings you to the door of the great mystery, and that stops there. So they said, okay, we'll stop there. But what I discovered, I think one of the greatest surprises, is that the awareness of spirituality pervades almost everything he wrote. It's there. It's what he was saying was, and I'm not going to tell you how to go past that door of the great mystery, but you better do it. You have to. You need that upper story of your life, that of your life's building. You need it. You've got to have it. You've got to have an interaction. Find your own way. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be this way. It's going to be that way. It's going to be religious or spiritual but not religious or whatever, but
Mm.
do it. And so many of the pieces I've worked with, some of them are directly addressed to spirituality. The piece I'm actually working on at this moment was called Spirituality in the 20th Century,
Mm.
Which I haven't done yet. You'll see it soon. But that focus was actually there
Mm.
in everything. And then I go back and look at his books and say, oh, it was there anyway. But particularly Americans were deathly afraid of letting anything esoteric or spiritual creep into psychosynthesis, because when he first brought it to America, the predominant psychology was behaviorism,
Yeah.
which was reductionist and materialist and extremely limited.
Mm.
So he wanted, and he and his colleagues that he worked with wanted to get an access to the intellectual mainstream of North America, because for some reason he decided the English-speaking world was a fertile ground, because he wasn't at the time getting anywhere in Europe.
No.
So he said, well,
right.
let's go to America and to England. And that's where things got started. And they wanted to make sure that it didn't get shut out before it even started.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people have kept that door closed, saying, when I first, I did some therapy work as part of my training, saying, and I worked with somebody who you could see almost geeked if I ever used the word God. Oh, that's religion. Oh, not knowing that, of course, you really want to connect with the spirituality of your client, whatever happens to be.
Mm.
But I sensed all through my training, there was a whole lot of people there who felt similarly. They just don't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think partly because there were a lot of refugees from religion that found psychosynthesis. They don't want any part of that mumbo jumbo, blah, 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 the false religion and the inadequate religion and the inadequate spirituality.
Mm.
And so they basically shied away from it completely.
Mm.
And a lot of the writings and the activities just didn't go there. But that was my surprise. Roberto was into the higher self and the spirituality constantly.
Exactly.
Saying, this is your orientation, this is your connection.
Yeah.
And the reason for personal psychosynthesis ultimately is so you can do a spiritual psychosynthesis.
Yes.
Even if many people decide not to, that really is, I think, the thing that I've loved and I've discovered so much, that psychosynthesis is a developmental process.
Mm.
It's not something you get your stuff together and you get your subs together and you can say, haha, I have a great relationship with God or higher self and I'm done. Heck no. I've understood that this Esther Jolie was always into development.
Mm.
There was a little postcard that actually they sent me from Florence at the Instituto, saying the motto of psychosynthesis is the only way out is the way up.
Mm.
in Roberto's handwriting.
Yeah.
That was the motto. The way out is the way up. So he was always concerned with development.
Mm.
If anybody, and he wouldn't push anybody, you don't want to go there, fine.
Mm.
But this is what it's about.
But I think perhaps that's also a misunderstanding, because when he speaks about, that psychosynthesis only leads to the door, he speaks about how we perceive God, the realization after the higher self, and there are many ways of perceiving how the higher self relates to God. You can have a Christian version, you could have a yoga version, and he didn't want to lock psychosynthesis into one particular path. So he spoke about the 7 ways to self-realization. And self-realization includes both the realization of yourself as a soul, but goes further, as he pointed out in The Act of Will, also to the realization of you and your connection to God, or what he calls the universal self. So in The Act of Will, he clearly lays out a path where you go to the ultimative realization of Buddha and Christ. He mentions these two as one of the greatest mystics of all times. So it's clearly in there in his version of psychosynthesis, a path that goes from the very basic steps through the lower unconscious and until the highest realization possible. So I think perhaps you have been in some kind of a culture that has have some kind of a, almost like some kind of a repression of the sublime,
Exactly. Yes.
it has been said, and there were, of course, reasons for that in the U.S. The collapse of the San Francisco Institute, where there was a lot of spiritual bypassing, and a lot in my training. There was a lot of focus on doing the basic work, the personal psychosynthesis, integrate the instincts, your sexuality, your power, and that's very, very good. But that doesn't mean that and if people are open and have a motivation to go further, that we shouldn't facilitate that growth and even inspire and motivate people to build a relationship to self, a higher self, and even if they want, doing practices, meditative practice, uniting with their higher self, so they can have a height experience of what is at the center of psychosynthesis, a height experience of themselves as a transcendent soul.
I have a suspicion. I was never involved. I came into psychosynthesis decades after the San Francisco Institute collapsed. But my suspicion is that there was a whole lot of what you'd call premature transcendence, among other things. There was a lot of power politics and a lot of neuroses and all kinds of stuff. But I think I think it scared people that people tried to go up too far too fast without the proper preparation.
Yeah.
And I think that made a lot of people who were refugees from the San Francisco Institute just completely shy away from this. Let's just stay with the psychology. Let's stay with the personal self. Let's stay where it's safe. And if anything, they would begin to deny some of the teachings that Assagioli gave because they thought that those were truly expressed by what happened in San Francisco. And I think San Francisco was kind of like the Jonestown of psychosynthesis. There was almost a mass suicide there. It was horribly destructive. And there was a lot of inappropriate, quote, spirituality, unquote, that was brought in by people who really didn't have the true experience of the higher self. And so people came away and said, well, there is no higher self, like John Furman. There is none. That's baloney. Because the concepts were actually hijacked by some people who then used them to create a cultish type environment. And so some people said, I just don't go there. Just don't go there. And so there's been a whole lot of not just repression of the sublime, but fear of it. Thinking that it would take you places you don't want to go.
Yeah.
And Roberto had no such problem, but he had the experience. And once you have the experience, like I've had it, like, okay, if you get abusive, then it's out of your personal side. It's one of your subpersonalities hijacking your car, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't mean you don't go to the spiritual self. It's there. And it doesn't originate any of the baloney that happens in your life. It's the opposite. It's always healing, always working for the good, and not just your personal good, but for the good of all.
Yeah. I think there was also a lot of trouble in many of the other psychotherapies that came up during that period in the 70s and 80s. And I think, that there was not that deep work on the lower unconscious. It's very obvious that Assagioli really stressed the need for a personal psychosynthesis of some sort, before we open up to the great mystery and work on the superconscious. Because if we haven't done the initial work in the lower unconscious, work with our instincts, with our power, our aggression, then of course these energies will hijack the energies coming from the superconscious. We guru tripping and only want to live in the superconscious. And I think there was a lot of that in the early period. So I understand also that there was some kind of a reaction toward the lower unconscious and let's stay there. But I think it's not psychosynthesis if we don't cover the whole egg diagram, if we are not including everything that's entailed in the vision, because actually psychosynthesis is a vision. It's a vision of what we may be when we really bring our heart, our will, our love into our personal and spiritual development. And it's also a psychospiritual practice. If we don't practice the techniques, if we don't have a daily practice where we try to align with source and try to purify our motives, then of course, then it's just intellectual. So it's both a vision and it gives us the tools for progression toward the path. And each path is unique, but there is some general guidelines ahead when we use psychosynthesis as a vision.
I think of it partly as a wisdom teaching.
Yeah.
A practical wisdom teaching, which also, if you get too far away from basic common sense and you think that your wisdom teaching is telling you to do things that your common sense says this is wrong, then you're probably not looking at a true teaching. But Love and Will, I think he also wrote that piece called Smiling Wisdom. Wisdom is implicit in the whole connection, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Love is good, but you must love wisely.
Exactly.
As he said.
Yeah. And I thought about asking you do you have any exercise you could present? We speak now about the necessity for a spiritual practice, and I hope the listeners of this podcast would like to do a little exercise to get a flavor of how we work with psychosynthesis. So do you have anything in mind you would like to present to us?
I developed one exercise that I actually developed back during my training and discovered, wow, it really works well. And I've used it off and on over the years with myself and with some others. And it's now been published in Petra Nacelli's book that includes the volume 2 of all the exercises. But for me, I suppose that comes to mind because something I find that it's very effective, both in terms of uncovering sometimes where your work needs to be done. Sometimes you don't always know, well, what do I need? Sometimes if something hits you in the face, you know you need to work at something. But sometimes there's a subtler thing that's waiting in the background and you don't know that you need to work at this. And this exercise can help uncover that.
Wow.
I call it the I am exercise.
Yes.
Let's see. How much time do we have for this?
As long as you wish.
All right. If you want, I'll walk you through it quickly. I won't give you the full amount of time that you'd need, but you'll get the idea, and then you can look at the book and read the things. So you get into a place where you're relaxed and you're ready to do some inner work. And the first step is to choose an ideal model for and about yourself. The model should be conceived as the best that is possible for you, not necessarily what you are like now or what you do now or what you think about yourself as you are now. Select an ideal for yourself, what you desire to be or to be like. It must be within the realm of what is theoretically possible, even if it's improbable or unlikely. And be careful not to dismiss an ideal because some inner voice says, well, you can't do that, but you can go ahead. This ideal might be just what's needed. So we're just excluding only things that are physically totally impossible, like turning into a chicken or something, flying to the moon. So choose an ideal for yourself of in an area where you are not now, but you'd like to be, what you'd like to be like. Secondly, create an affirmative statement spoken in the first person in the present, such as I am, and there's your ideal, I am this. And express the ideal as if it is, and this is using one of Roberto's techniques, the as if. Express it, I am, as if it is your reality right now. For example, I am caring, I am healthy, I'm aware of what I need to do, or I'm very good at this, or I'm always honest at something. But I am. Choose a statement in the form of I am, and it should not include I want to be, or I wish, or I'm going to, or anything like that. You express the ideal as I am. How you feel about the ideal is not the criterion on which you choose the ideal. It's what you truly wish to be. I am. And then say the statement in your mind or out loud as if it is your reality. You may want to say it more than once, but in a relaxed but alert state, being aware of what's going on within you as you speak this, either internally or externally. After you've spoken your affirmation, I am, so forth, be silent inwardly and outwardly, and listen for any inner voices that may speak in your mind. It is important to allow any response that you get, to not censor or control what comes up. You may say your ideal, I am, and you may hear an inner voice that says, no way, you can't do that. Or a conciliatory voice that says, oh, I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. Or maybe I'm not. Anyway, mom would never let me do that. Or don't get your hopes up. Any variety of comments, objections, encouragement, anything. Listen after you've said your affirmation for what voices are there. They may not come as a voice. You may experience some impulse, a feeling. The point is to pay attention. Listen to the response when you say the affirmative affirmation, the ideal. You may want to write down both what your ideal is, either now or later, and what voices you hear, because they may run away pretty quick. You may want to record, either now or later, what the inner voice response or the inner feeling response is. We're going quickly here, not as if it would be a regular exercise. Fourth, after you've allowed all the responses of your affirmation to be heard, and allow them all their airtime, or after you've written them down, then take some time to see whether you know where within you the responses are coming from. If it's a negative response, such as, oh, you couldn't do that, come on. Look and see where that's coming from. Responding voices may be of your parents, your teachers, your spouse, your friends, your subpersonalities, your own deepest convictions, common knowledge, something you read, or just a thought, a feeling you happen to have. See if you can identify the source of what comes up in response to your ideal affirmation. Then check your ideal affirmation against what I call bedrock reality. Is it really impossible, or does it only seem that way? Is it out of reach, or could you develop strategies to make it real? Is the voice that responded realistic, or just pretending to be realistic to try to stop you from going for your ideal? Over the next few days, or even weeks, mentally play with both the affirmation and the responses you get to it. With the idea of allowing yourself to get used to the possibility that your ideal may become your reality in one form or another. Just that. You don't have to immediately plan how to make it happen. That would happen later. Allow your whole mental and emotional inner landscape to shift to allow your ideal to get a place to be. This may take some time. You may have to use other exercises, such as the acting as if, other types of work to allow your unconscious mind, your body, your emotions, and your conscious mind to get used to the possibility of your ideal becoming reality. The fifth step is become aware of whether any of your inner responses to your ideal affirmation arises out of fear or out of self-protection or to protect somebody else or to make things easier for yourself or for somebody else or not wanting to be bothered or some other limiting source. Follow the trail to the inner source. See whether you discover something that needs to be healed, a memory, an experience, a thought, a prejudice. Over time, take whatever steps you need to heal what needs healing. Get help with it if you need to. Sixth, allow yourself to hope. Hope is the fuel of life. Practical reality makes things happen only after hope has opened the door and allowed the light of the ideal, that affirmation, the vision, to come in. So it's important also to allow yourself to affirm this is possible, even if I don't know how it happens. Allow the unseen forces of life to work for you, for they do, and they will. And seventh and last, only after you've processed all this over time and check your sources, decide whether you're going to act to make your ideal a reality. Part of your acting to make something a reality may involve stopping doing something that stands in the way of the realization of your goal. Roberto's book, The Act of Will, outlines the procedures and the processes by which you can work with your inner resources to make that ideal a reality. There are alternatives to explore, plans to make, steps to take, and much else. But only go toward your ideal when you are ready. Be aware of whether you feel ready or not. Sometimes fear will tell you, I'm not ready, or some other similar outburst designed to make you stop and give up. But you will notice that such messages will not help you become ready or to do better. They undermine you. So try to set aside any such messages. Give yourself encouragement with messages like, I can do this. I'm getting better at this. I will arrive at my goal. Over time, look for signs that your ideal is on its way. There might be small signs, there might be large ones, but trust that it is on the way. So that is essentially the exercise. We just, we condensed what should take maybe 20 minutes or half an hour. And as I say, some of this, you take place days and weeks after you do the exercise. It's not a one-shot deal.
But I really like the exercise in the way that it's in some way it's working with the will. You know, I choose the affirmation, I am calm, loving presence. I am calm, loving presence. And when I say I am, this is a decision to identify with I am calm, loving presence. So it's actually an act of will. I center myself in a particular frequency of my mind where this calm, loving presence reside. And you could also say it's the experience that I take a stand. I take a stand that I am, my identity is calm, loving presence. And from that center, when I identify with that, then of course I can see all kinds of voices or impulses popping up that is in some way exactly the opposite. I felt a nervousness, a restlessness, and of course there was not enough time to go in and investigate what it was all about. But in some way you can say that everything that is opposed to that affirmation will of course emerge out into the light. Because when I take the stand that I am calm, loving presence, anything that is inside of me that is antagonistic to that statement will emerge. And then we have a battle between me as calm, loving presence and everything in me that's not calm and loving.
There can be a variety of different dynamics that show up. Sometimes the voice basically just asks you to ignore it. Or just say, well, this is way too much for you. So don't waste your time with this. I mean, this is for next year, maybe, or something. Yes. Back when you're there's such an enormous variety of responses, everything from outright conflict to just lethargy. I don't feel like this.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it does combine ideal model, the as if exercise, and a few things. And if you or listeners want, you can give them my email address, and I'm be happy to send a PDF of the written version of it to anybody who wants.
Great.
Which of course is a little more extensive, but I followed pretty much what's in the writing. But.
Yeah, of course, I will include your email below the video here. And also, if you have any comments, now I'm speaking to the viewers of this podcast. If you have any comments or objections or whatever, just write them below the video and I will look into them and we will try to provide sources and inspirations and perhaps have a dialogue. For now, I think I will just send you my gratitude, and it has been a great pleasure to have this conversation with you. Are there anything here, lastly, that we have forgot to mention?
Nothing comes up except gratitude to you for doing this kind of work. It's great.
Okay, but thank you so much, Jan, for providing all the insights into yourself and your experiences and all the work you have done. And and to the viewers out there, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast so we can spread the word of psychosynthesis worldwide.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Psychosynthesis Conversations. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and help us to spread the wisdom.